We're going to look at writing the equations of polars. And this is something pretty easy to do, not as bad as graphing them. And we're going to take a look at a couple of these together from your homework assignment. For example, let's take a look at number 2. Now, the first thing we want to identify is a rose. Now, if you recall anything about a rose, they're either r equals something cosine n theta, or r equals something sine n theta. Now, the first thing we want to do is find n. How many? Now, remember, n comes from the number of petals. So I count the number of petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 petals. But remember, if it's an even number, 2n equals 8. That's twice the number. So n, so remember, if it's an even number, we multiply n by 2. So we get n equals 4. Now the other thing we have to find out is this cosine or sine? Well, to answer that, we just look at the graph. If it's any part of it is on the x-axis, it's cosine. Remember, cosine of theta is, for a rose, it will be on the x-axis. If it's not on the x-axis, it's going to be sine. So we know that this is a cosine curve. We know n equals 4. What's the last thing we need? A. Now, A is pretty easy to get. What's the furthest we travel out? Remember, cosine, the biggest it could be is 1. This is my amplitude. Remember, A is the amplitude. So A, well, normally the amplitude is 1. Well, how far out do I go the furthest? 1, 2, 3, 4. So A is 4. So my equation for number 2 is R equals 4 cosine 4 theta. And there's our answer. And I'm going to put that up here. R equals 4 cosine 4 theta. Let's try another rose. Let's turn this over real quick. And let's try number 7. Now, 7 down here, also a rose. So there's a couple things we need. One, it is a rose. So we need n. We know if this is sine or cosine. And we need to know what A is. So to get n, we count the number of petals. And in this case, easy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 petals. And because it's odd, n is 5. Now, sine or cosine, it's not on the x-axis. No x-axis. So therefore, this is our sine graph. And A is our amplitude. What's the furthest we go out? It's kind of hard to tell right here, but if I look over here, we can. Count 1, 2, 3, 4. So A is 4. So we can write our equation. R equals 4 sine of 5 theta. And that's my answer. R equals 4 sine of 5 theta. And there's our answer here. So next, let's take a look at a lemison. Now, lemisons are a little bit harder to do. So we're going to go back and do number 3 with you over here, okay? We're going to take a look at number 3 over here with us, okay? Now, to get a lemison, this is a lemison with a loop. So for number 3, it is a lemison with a loop. Now, remember the equation for a lemison. Y equals A plus or minus B cosine theta, or Y equals A plus or minus B sine theta. So to answer this, very easy to do, we need A and B. Now, the first thing I want us to recognize is this, because it's a loop, is A greater than B or less than B? Well, because it's a loop, because this is a loop, we know that A has to be less than B. So we know that for a fact. Okay, now, how we get the equation of a lemison is very easy to do. Identify that it's going to be where it's going to be a loop. We now have to find A and B. So to get A, now what I'm going to do is from the center, I'm going to measure out where it crosses an axis, if it's the y-axis or the x-axis, doesn't matter. This is what we call the shoulder of the polar function, and the shoulder is always A. So in this case right here, if I count out 1, 2, our A is 2. So that right away gives me A equals 2. So the next question is, how do we find B? Well, remember, Lemisons are A plus cosine, A plus B, A plus B. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure this distance down here. To get the furthest distance that we travel from the center all the way down to here, this is the distance A plus B. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's 5. So we know A plus B equals 5. Well, we already said A was 2 from the shoulder. 2 plus B equals 5. B equals 3. Now, the next thing all we have to do now is determine what type is it, sine or cosine. Well, sine of theta is on the y-axis. Cosine of theta is on the x-axis. Since we're centered on the y-axis, this is going to be our sine curve. It's opening down, so it's going to be negative. So our equation will be our sine one, y equals A, B sine of theta, and because it's opening down, it's minus. If it was opening as like a heart, like a normal heart, it's going to be down. So it's negative. If it was going up, positive. We'll talk about that in just a second. So my equation, y equals 2 minus 3 sine of theta. And there's our our looped lemicon. So r equals, or should be r equals 2 minus 3 sine of theta. So kind of a quick hint here for all Lemisons, if you want to. If it's on the x-axis or y-axis. Okay? If it's on the x-axis, if it's cosine or sine. If it's cosine on the x-axis, y-axis, it's our sine of theta. Cosine is positive if to the right, negative if to the left. Sine is positive if going up, and negative if going down. That's our Lemison rule. Okay, so what I would like you to do is try number 1 tonight and number 4, and we'll go over those tomorrow with you, okay? And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have fun.